Hey everyone, my name is Chris Marts, and I wanted to first thank all of the wonderful folks at Gatsby for asking me to participate in today's GatsbyCamp. I'm excited to share with you a little bit about how my team at AB&C has migrated to Gatsby. Like I said, my name is Chris Marts. You can find me on Twitter, and this is my company's website, but don't look too closely at it. We're currently migrating it to Gatsby. We're basically a full-service advertising agency, and I work on the digital team, where we build websites, landing pages, marketing automations, email campaigns, etc. And I serve as a technical resource and sort of an architect or lead to the team. So today's theme is how to scale with Gatsby and how to stretch the size, flexibility, and complexity of your sites. I'm going to shift that a little bit and talk about how our switch to Gatsby has helped us scale ourselves. So as a background, for many years, we've been an ASP.NET MVC, now core shop, and it has served us well. However, as the rate of change of the front-end engineering and complexity has rapidly increased over the past few years, we found increasing friction in being able to move at a pace that we wanted to without being able to incorporate some newer technologies, whether that was a CSS processor or a hot reload mechanism. I'm not going to directly compare frameworks in this talk, but rather focus more on some of the benefits that we've gained by switching to Gatsby. Having said that, it helps to compare a little bit and talk about the friction points that we had in our previous stack and how those improved when we switched. The first thing is sort of getting data onto the screen. And that's taking JSON. We felt like we were spending a lot of time writing code that was moving data from one format to another, sometimes multiple times before it ended up on screen. We would get JSON out of an API, deserialize that into objects, pass that into a view where we use server-side logic to loop over that and emit markup. You add a field to the data source and you had to update the model. You have to update the code to hydrate the model, rinse and repeat, right? Another point of friction we had was sort of separation of concerns. So, we were keeping the markup separate from the style, separate from the script. We keep the validator separate from the model and keep the interface separate from the implementation. Sounds right, right? And sort of my computer science background kept telling me we were doing this right, but in the end, it really was part of the problem. To work on a feature or a page or a component, you could end up in literally 8 different files in just as many folders. The controller, the view, the model, the validator, the interface, the module, the CSS, the JavaScript file. It just all felt like it was getting worse. There was also some new stuff that we were having difficulty adding, stuff like hot reload, auto prefixing. This is either because it just wasn't supported at all, it didn't work reliably, it didn't work fast enough, or it was coming in the next major version, or it was just super complicated or hacky to sort of get working at all. And the final point was that, we had multiple languages involved, and C# is great, but there's a certain amount of task switching that happens when switching between C# and JavaScript, and a lot of the backend stuff that our front-end people didn't feel comfortable with, was sort of off limits to them, or at least they felt that way. So quick disclaimer, it's important to keep in mind that our target outputs are really highly front-end driven. So we're not developing complex software engineering projects. Certainly there is software that not only benefits from, but really requires a much more rigorous approach when it comes to whether it's separation of concerns or strong typing or dependency injection, testing frameworks, etc. At the same time, there's certainly no shortage of sophistication nor functionality that we need to include in every site we produce. It's just that it's not the software engineering complexity of like a display driver or a logistics scheduling system. So it's stuff like making sure we're doing responsive images properly, advanced analytics tracking, or just overall site performance. So at the end of the day, our familiarity with our stack is really what lets us say, yes, we can do that to almost anything that's asked from us. So to that end, we've had success sort of picking a core set of tech and evolving it over time instead of constantly trying to stack hop or always add the latest and greatest tech into our process. Even with the limitations and pain points, throwing out our stack and switching to something entirely new didn't seem like an obvious immediate next move, but ultimately was a process that was sort of years in the making and started before I even realized it. There were these sort of inflection points at the beginning of the year that I started to notice. It was probably with the release of Gatsby 3 that came across my Twitter feed, and the announcement of Gatsby Functions and Gatsby Cloud, and even before that, the version of React with hooks and the growth of headless CMS over the years. There was just a sort of coming together of all these technologies that made me take a second look at it. And what we essentially came up with was, in a nutshell, Gatsby plus Tailwind plus Storyblock and friends. And so, there's lots of different ways to put these stacks together. But I just wanted to talk about the benefits of the approach that we came up with, which is mostly, component development. So obviously that's React. And it really helped get rid of the 8 different files to represent one thing. Having a CSS as a single concern didn't seem to have a lot of benefits, but having the contact form as a single form as a single concern definitely did. And because every component is usually just in a single file, it's really great for sharing between sites without a lot of overhead. You can literally just take a file and move it into a new site, and you don't have to pick different parts of different files to move that one sort of feature over. The benefit of Tailwind, there's a lot of debate about Tailwind, but one great thing about it is there simply is no CSS file, right? I mean, obviously there's some CSS you have to write here and there, but it's nice to be able to just work directly in the markup without having to worry about a file that you're switching over to 300 lines down or 3,000 lines down. We also have a template site that we sort of start from, and then we backport sort of common changes into it. And for the CMS, we essentially generate, one-to-one relationships between the components that we have in the code and the CMS blocks. So there's lots of headless CMSs that do this. Storyblock is a great example. You can kind of see we define these various blocks so that any given content item can be composed from them. And then what we essentially do is we map those into the React components on the front end. So while we can construct a page manually and use a component, so for example, the stats component here at the top you see, the content editors can also use that stat block in the CMS, and we simply pass the values as props into that stat component in the template page. So benefits of Gatsby specifically. Well, first, the inner loop is so fast. When the drop-down list updates the items, like when it's open, then you're in front-end heaven, right? GraphQL, it's great. So all the data gets to us in sort of one format, and we loop over it in one format. It's all JavaScript. It's great. Responsive images. This is obviously a big thing, but we don't have to resize anything. We don't have to think about placeholders. We don't have to manage complicated markup. It all just works. React, right? So there's a reason it's one of the most popular front-end frameworks. We were concerned about being able to use non-React libraries. We've, come up with techniques for doing all sorts of stuff over the years, but we've had almost no challenges there, knock on wood, either because we found React alternatives that are often better, React wrappers to existing libraries, libraries that support React right out of the box, or, we just make it work somehow. Use ref. So the other advantage to Gatsby is JavaScript, sort of from back to front. Performance is hard to beat. They have a great plugin system. So many of our common concerns are handled by a Gatsby plugin, whether it's the tag manager, post CSS, site manifest, etc. Gatsby Cloud, we're sort of all in there. It's just really well integrated. It's fast. It's got built-in SSL. My alternative is to go into some other place, provision a site, provision the SSL. It's all, it only takes a few minutes, but with Gatsby Cloud, it's just integrated and built in. And then, of course, functions. So this was obviously key for us as we're often making lead gen sites or sites that have to send content information somewhere or pull information in from somewhere in real time. We have big plans for leveraging this on future sites. We've already used it on some of the ones we've launched, and we're really excited. But it is definitely one of the things that made static site generation an option for us. So web performance is a critical topic these days. Just go through that a little bit. Obviously, if you're doing this, about LCP, FID, CLS. And the nice thing about these is that with Gatsby, the performance is sort of baked in, right? And really good. So these scores are sort of from our template site, which admittedly isn't doing much, But a framework that starts you at 100 across the board is my kind of framework. Our performance scores actually tend to stay super high and typically only go down for things we often don't have any control over, like all of the tracking scripts that our media department wants us to add to the sites. Here's a little timeline. We've basically launched 7 sites or microsites or landing pages in 4 months with basically just 2 designers and 2 developers, myself included. We have a larger team, but these are just the group of people that have been launching this set of sites here on Gatsby. One of those sites was actually part of a larger effort to get Delaware vaccinated, and the entire campaign was conceived of, designed, and the website built in literally 1 week. And there's just no way we would have pulled that off in our previous stack. Here's a few of the sites, just so you can kind of get an example of them. And one last thing that just to sort of wrap this up in terms of how our experience and why we have enjoyed switching to this is that really our goal as a technical team is to use a stack that enables us to say, yes, we can do that to all of the crazy things that get asked of us, but then also end up loving the website at the end of the project. We've built lots of sites where we get it done, but then we just wish we'd never see that site again. And the Gatsby sites are great. We launch them, and then when changes come in, we're hoping that changes come in on Gatsby sites so that we can work on those and not some of the other sites we've launched in the past. Thanks for your time. I'm looking forward to answering any questions and see you out there on the web.